Okay, now we'll start the next part of this neuroscience lecture, which is the part about psychopharmacology. And if you're more interested in this kind of stuff, I do teach physiological psychology. You can get involved in this down the road. Actually, let me start with the big issue here, which is what I talked about at the start, the idea of reductionism. If you remember, when we started talking about these issues of mind and body, drug companies are very busy trying to come up with drugs that can we just fix this part of the brain with this type of drug and fix it and fix any sort of behavior going on. If you believe that you could just fix the neurotransmitter and fix the behavior, that would be what we call type reductionism. Most people, drug companies are certainly looking for those solutions, but most people believe once again in token reductionism, that when you have a disease, you can affect the pharmacology of it by doing things to the synapse, but it's not going to be a one-on-one match. So that's the idea. There are two types of drugs that we often talk about. A drug can either be classified as an agonist or an antagonist. An agonist is a drug that mimics a neurotransmitter. A good example of this is what my dad takes for his Parkinson's disease. He takes L-Dopa. L-Dopa would be considered a dopamine agonist. An antagonist is a drug that blocks a neurotransmitter from working. A good example of this would be a drug that actually, if you're familiar with schizophrenia, that a drug like Haldol. Haldol blocks dopamine receptors, and thus it helps people with schizophrenia and would be classified as a dopamine antagonist. So to go back to this once again, drugs can either be agonist or an antagonist. And we had that good example with dopamine situations. And when you take drugs, they can affect synthesis. They can affect the release. When you take amphetamines, that causes dopamine and norepinephrine to be released. They can affect binding and inactivation. Going back to this issue C here, and we've talked about this already, it's going back to this issue of reductionism. Now, we all know very well about pain. I don't know if I shared this with some of you. I think I may have. I actually was in a very terrible bicycle accident back in 2013. It was 2 days after I actually took a bike ride from Roanoke up to Lexington and back, pretty close to Stanton, actually. I fell asleep while I was riding 2 days later, and I had a cerebral hemorrhage and a lot of pain. I was put actually under, and I was in an induced coma for a week. So, why do I bring that up now? Because pain is a big topic. Can you take drugs that help with pain? The answer is yes. One of the biggest drugs that we have out there, of course, is a drug known as morphine. Now, does morphine help with pain? The answer is yes. One of the key issues, though, with something like morphine, though, is morphine helps with pain, but it has a lot of side effects. And one of the things the pharmaceutical companies have been working on is they've actually identified that for the endorphins, endorphins are the neurotransmitter in your brain. Morphine is the drug that binds to endorphin receptors. It turns out that endorphins in your brain, there are different shapes for some of these receptors postsynaptically. And one of the real hopes has been, can we actually find a drug that will maybe just bind to one of these receptor subtypes, fix the pain problem, but maybe not cause all the side effects? Receptor specificity leading to behavioral specificity. The idea going back to type reductionism. If we could find that drug, that would be very good. Unfortunately, we haven't really been able to find that type of drug. So pain is a good example of this idea of token reductionism, but not type. If we could find drugs that just fix the problem by binding to one receptor subtype, a different shaped receptor, and not cause all the side effects, that would be great. So moving this along to depression. I asked you guys about a few depression products. The original products for depression. Nardil was a good example of this. And if you look at it, it was called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. What that basically meant is the monoamine oxidases, they would inactivate a neurotransmitter. They're an enzyme. And the first products that were used were products that blocked these MAOs. So they were called MAO inhibitors. They worked well for depression, but unfortunately, they had all sorts of side effects for wine, cheese, food, and because of all these side effects, there were a lot of things you couldn't do. So that led to the next generation. The next generation under B, it says Paxil, but Paxil, Prozac, and what's the third one? Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft were second generation ones. These were basically SSRIs. They block the reuptake of serotonin alone. And by blocking the reuptake of serotonin alone, they seemed to fix things like depression and didn't have nearly the side effect profile. So they were a little more on the type reductionistic side. But if you know people, these products are prescribed all over the place. More token reductionism, they can help, but they're not going to fix it because you need to also work at a cognitive level. The newest products that some of you identified are things like Effexor and Cymbalta. They actually block the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. And by doing this, you can also help people with depression as well. So they are some of the new products. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.